Good morning to all of you. I'm glad that we can all be together today to celebrate the life and to honor the many accomplishments of Seth Vidal. So welcome on behalf of the Vidal family, Eunice Chang and her family. Please follow the program as it is written and come forward. Speak directly into the microphone as this service is being recorded. God of all faiths, with whom shall live the spirits of those who died, and with whom the souls of the faithful are in joy and felicity, we give you heartfelt thanks for the good examples of all your servants, especially Seth, who, having finished their course in faith, now find rest and refreshment. Amen.
Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone, silence the pianos, and with muffled drum, bring out the coffin and let the mourners come. Let airplanes circle, moaning overhead, scribbling on the sky the message he is dead. Let crepe bows round the white necks of public doves. Let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. He was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week and my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out every one. Pack the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood, for nothing now can ever come to any good. I love you, Seth.
A reading from Ecclesiastes, chapter 3. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. What profit hath he that worketh in that wherein he labors? Most of us just scratch our heads when we hear that passage from Ecclesiastes, wondering how such a blessed man of God as Solomon could write a book or passages notable undertones with hopelessness and even despair. He probably wrote it at a point in his life when he was more captivated by the world than by a higher being. Ecclesiastes illustrates how vain, meaningless, and empty existence is when we chase after the wind. When the ways of the world become even for someone like Solomon, who from the perspective of others had everything that the world had to offer. This is the rule rather than the exception for those whose gods, for all intents and purposes, have become themselves money, people, wealth, possessions, and other attractive material things in the world take us over. This is certainly counter to the way that Seth Vidal lived his life. In fact, it wasn't until his death that I, or many of us, even knew all of the things that he accomplished. But I did know what he valued in life: his family, his wonderful father, Wade, whom he talked with on the phone every day. I saw it with my own eyes. His mother, Alicia, so dear to his heart, and William Clayton, better known as Dear Pop, the maternal grandfather whom he loved and admired greatly, and from whom he sought wisdom. They truly shared everything with mutual delight and admiration for each other. His brothers, Wade and Logan, were also his friends. They made him smile, while their partners in life, Misty and Kate, and the niece-fews, Kelsey and Will, made them complete, bringing peace and completeness to Seth's life. And Eunice was the absolute love of his life. He admired her for her strength and endurance, commitment to protecting animals, for her curiosity about absolutely everyone and everything, and for her intellect. He was proud of his life partner. They shared love that many people will never know. They shared hopes and dreams together, and they also made conversing with each other seem so easy because it was so natural for them. They truly loved one another and loved life together. She brought him complete and utter joy and peace. And with Corey, they made a complete family in a home built by love, honor, and conviction. Seth was blessed with many things. His intellect was evident in the work that he did and in the way that he shared his knowledge, bringing it to a level that anyone, even myself, could understand about the computers and the software. He never made me or anybody else feel that he was diluting it. I always seemed to get it when he talked about it. He was virtuous and able to walk and talk with everyone whom he met without exclusion. Like death, Ecclesiastes is hard to comprehend. Solomon wrote many things that are difficult to comprehend, particularly at this moment. Yet the overall script is like life, a stunningly beautiful and intricately woven tapestry with a virtually infinite amount of colors and textures, ups and downs, completely full of hope and promise, even in the face of death. There is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live. This statement sums up the life and accomplishments of Seth Vidal. His death leaves a hole in our hearts. He accomplished so many things in his short and wonderful life. In just these few years, he accomplished so much, receiving accolades from all over this country, from all over the world, and yet he made time for his family and for all of us, no matter how busy and famous he became. He lived life to the fullest, and he left us with indelible impressions of doing the right thing at the right time and for the right reasons. The world is truly a better place because of our good friend, brother, grandson, love of life, Seth. His candor and loftiness, zest for life, his sincerity, and the passion that he had for all of us makes us the luckiest people in the world. On our list of valued possessions, we will note Seth, Eunice, and Corey, as well as their families, as our prizes. He would want us to wipe away the tears from our eyes in order to see the beauty around us and to enjoy life to the fullest. He rests in peace, and we mourn the loss. So rejoice, rejoice. All of us have been blessed by his life, work, and friendship. His memory will live on forever.
A couple of years ago, Eunice posted this poem on one of her blogs with a photo she took of Seth sleeping on her shoulder while she was awake. And it's just a beautiful image and a beautiful poem that I hadn't heard before. It's called The Coming of Light by Mark Strand. Even this late it happens, the coming of love, the coming of light. You wake and the candles are lit as if by themselves. Stars gather, dreams pour into your pillows, sending up warm bouquets of air. Even this late, the bones of the body shine. And tomorrow's dust flares into breath.
Seth was a good man, and that is a rare thing in our world. He believed that our world is what we make of it, and he was determined to make it better. He was passionate in his beliefs, but he was never a zealot. He was brilliant, the sort of brilliance that lights up a room. When I first met him 15 years ago at a Linux users group meeting, I thought to myself that this was someone I wanted to know, someone I wanted to learn from. His flame burned so brightly that you just were drawn to him. You wanted to work with him. You wanted to be near him, and you couldn't turn away. I was lucky enough to have that chance as a co-contributor to the Fedora community and eventually as his manager at Red Hat. I remember giving him problems to solve, the most difficult problems, and you could just see him thinking them through. You could see it spinning in his brain, and as he dissected the problem, asked questions, and worked out a solution. And it was inspiring to see that. I have read so many stories in the last few days about how he planted seeds in other people, how he inspired others and made them better. He truly cared about everyone and everything around him and would selflessly give of himself, his time, his talents, and his heart. His code is used by millions of people all over the world. But his generous spirit, his passion, and his caring, that lives on in the hearts and minds of so many. Those seeds that he planted in us all, he contributed without a second thought, representing the purest spirit of open source. To put it simply, his legacy is not only that he made the world a better place, although he did, but truly that he inspired us all to do the same and to do it together. I think it's telling that my favorite memories of Seth are not tied to work or code or computers, but rather laughing with him and playing games, suggesting books to each other to read, and even listening to him sing Beastie Boys songs in the worst New York accent I've ever heard. I remember him comforting me when I was sad, calming me when I was angry, and always, always being honest with me. Seth was humble. I think he'd be a bit bothered that I just said all that about him. Carl Sagan once said, "For small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love." Seth made our corner of the universe bearable with his love, and we all miss him terribly.
Seth Vidal was my friend. He befriended me shortly after I opened my restaurant, and our friendship only deepened. He was a friend to many of my current and past staff, and I have had texts of mourning from several of our former employees, hoping Eunice and his family are okay and wishing them well. Seth had a passion for food and flavors. He loved gardening and the farmer's market. He was a tireless supporter, critic, and friend to me and many of my friends in restaurants in town. As I told my husband, Seth was actually one of the good guys. As I looked at posts from the computing world, the neighborhood, and the bicycling world, I realized that we all feel similarly. Seth was devoted to us, and we, in turn, were devoted to him. He wanted quality, but was always kind and giving. He wanted to learn. What was that new flavor in the jam, for example? He noticed. He joined us in celebrating our successes and thankfully forgave us our errors. He was devoted to Durham. He cared about new businesses and wanted to learn about them and get to know the people in them. He was devoted to his neighborhood. We at Watts enjoyed the benefit of both being a restaurant he liked and also being in the neighborhood. And he was devoted to Eunice. And I can't tell you what a joy that was to watch and how happy that made us all. How nice it was when we at Watts were suffering through a Sunday brunch, and if any of you have ever worked brunch, you know what I mean, to have sweet and joyful Seth and Eunice come in to raise our spirits. And I truly know that I am not alone in the food community in mourning Seth. Parker and Otis, Toast, Joe Van Gogh, Scratch, Chapel Hill Creamery, Loaf, Little Farm, Sam's Quick Shop. Hey, never discount the beer store. All have joined us in participating in this memorial, and all feel similarly lucky to have known him and sad to have lost him. For me, one of the sparkles of my day is gone. And I will miss Seth tomorrow, and in 2 weeks, and 15 years from now.
Hi, everybody. Excuse me. I'm a bicycle mechanic by trade. I started a shop in Chapel Hill called Back Alley Bikes. And that's how I knew Seth was our shared love of bicycles and bicycling. And I'm as uncomfortable in front of an audience as I am in a suit. But it is International Bicycle Mechanic in a Suit Day, and glad to see. I've seen a couple other bicycle mechanics in suits, so I'm not alone in that, and none of us are alone in our love of Seth. So, one moment. One other disclaimer. as a bicycle mechanic, I'm not used to civilized language, so forgive me if there's a coarse word or two. But I'm also kind of angry. So. Seth was one of the first customers at my bike shop to become a friend. When Back Alley Bikes was as much the street address of my shop as it was its title. I don't remember whether or not he bought anything during his first few visits, or if we just geeked out on bikes. But it was immediately evident that we were kindred spirits. Beyond the fact that we were both unapologetic bike nerds, who occupy a rung on the social ladder just above players of Magic the Gathering, but just below Dungeons and Dragons players. We found symphonic harmony in our shared expressions of biting sarcasm and complementary visions of the world as simultaneously fucked and magnificent. Trying to embrace both the tragedy and the comedy of the human condition is how I imagine one arrives at the designation Seth used to describe himself, misanthropic humanist. The contradiction is apparent, but false. Whether someone loves or hates humanity is simply a matter of perspective. One can love individuals and still be disappointed in the group. As Gandhi said, hate the sinner, or sorry, as that was someone else. As Gandhi said, hate the sin, love the sinner. Or as Ice-T said, don't hate the player, hate the game. Seth's love of cycling could easily be seen as a manifestation of his misanthropic humanism, an uncomplicated machine from the 19th century in a hyper-technological 21st century. The bicycle is the very embodiment of a desire to live a simple life in this complicated world. The act of riding a bicycle is as useful as it is playful, and the experience is as direct as it is transcendent. It's easy to believe that the world could be a better place when you're on your bike. At times you feel like this very bike ride might be leading to that better place. And this is how I will choose to remember Seth, smiling, hopeful, and riding his bike.
My friendship with Seth was, like many here, I'm sure, punctuated and progressed through the art of debate. In fact, my first interaction with him was a debate about whether or not I truly needed access to the physics server at Duke. And I won that one. And then proceeded to lose every other in the 10 years since. Except for one, sort of. Last spring, Seth and I were sitting at the bar at Hummingbird Cafe, and we were looking out over Duke's East Campus, and we were debating whether or not one should care about life after their death. Seth's original point was that he would not care, because ever the reliable messenger of logic, he would be dead and therefore could not care. It was impossible. And I, the ever touchy-feely denier, said I would care. I would care now, while I was alive, that I lived my life in such a way to make the lives of others better after I'm gone. And in an unprecedented turn of events, Seth conceded the point. It may have been the pity he had for me always losing to his flawless logic, but he gave it to me. And I felt enormous triumph, and may have even gloated, both then and several times since. I don't think Seth fully realized how much I looked up to him. I don't think I knew until Tuesday morning. I copied him in near everything, from his habits and hobbies to his choices in fashion and furniture. He was a living example of principle and kindness and joy. And none of us expected we'd have so much more time than him to practice living those virtues. But I like to think, based on his former concession, that Seth would appreciate how much each life here has been made better and more purposeful because of the way he lived his. So I'm going to keep riding my bike and eating good food and showing up for things and being awesome at my job and buying clothes that make me feel handsome and caring about the communities that I'm a part of. Because like Seth did, When it's my time, I'd like to leave the world better off than when I found it.
Dear friends of Seth, I'm Seth's friend too. I'm Melissa, and I worked at Duke, and I have the privilege to have hired Seth at Duke in 1999. And I think he was pretty much almost fresh out of college. He might have had one job that he left because it was in industry and they just only cared about making money and didn't care about delivering quality. And he was hired into the physics department, and I was the kind of manager of computing. So I worked with all of, whoever got hired in arts and sciences. And Seth was so clearly magnificent. We could hardly believe that he was as young as he was. And we thought the only reservation from immediately hiring him was, well, we'll never be able to keep this guy. He's going to leave immediately. He's just too good to be true. But we said, how long will you stay? And he said, maybe 3 years. And we said, okay, that's worth it. We'll take you for 3 years. And he stayed long after I was gone. And he made the world a better place from a little crummy office in the physics building. He made the world a better place. And he was a partner the whole time, because in those days, computing wasn't very popular, and people didn't really understand it yet. And it was an uphill battle the whole way. And there was nothing but lots of fiefdoms. And one thing that technology does is it allows you to do the things that can be done once for millions of people possible. And it frees people up to live lives and love and care. And Seth, with his own time and his own effort, he never asked for anything. He never asked for recognition. He did it because it was right. He always did things because they were right. Now, we haven't talked much about the open source community, but that's what Seth did too. He recognized that we're all better when we work with one another. And that was his joy. But you had to play fair, because you don't work together if you're not playing fair. And he always played fair, and he always called foul when there was foul. And he was a wonderful partner. And my heart is absolutely broken. I have walked around in this city since I left that position. I have walked around knowing Seth was on this planet, and knowing Seth was my friend and my ally, and that if I ever needed him, he was there. And I've often wondered, what was the project I was going to work on with Seth? That there was still some project. And my life is changed with Seth no longer here. I can't walk across my kitchen without remembering Eunice, who is here, and the rest of the community who love Seth, because he did walk what he talked. That's why he is so powerful, because he was very simple. He just did what he said he was going to do. And he cared, and it was his caring that drove him. He didn't have any agenda except what was good for everybody. And he did allow himself to be corrected. And he had a wonderful sense of humor. So I pray that all of our lives be changed, because Seth has galvanized every bit of goodness in us and made us realize that what's good in us is what matters. I heard recently on the radio someone say, those that go down in battle live forever. Seth was champion of the good. He was champion for the good. Valiant champion. And he went down in the battle for that, on his bike, biking being part of it. And he lives forever. And he lives forever in me, and I will not forget him.
I'm Meredith Emmett, and I was Seth's neighbor and his friend. And I want to say that one of the delights about being neighbors with somebody is you see almost all of them, because you see them every day. And so today, when I was thinking about what did I want to wear, I put on my simple gray shorts and my white shirt, because that's what Seth usually wore. And I knew that because I saw him almost every day. I rode my bike because Seth would think it's silly for me to drive my car the few blocks. But I also want to say that when you see somebody every day, you know that sometimes they're not perfect. And I want to appreciate Seth today for his grumpiness and his curmudgeonliness. And what I realized this week is that it's okay to be grumpy and curmudgeonly when it comes from your heart and when it's about wanting other people to do right and be right and do the right thing. And that's why Seth was grumpy and curmudgeonly. And watch out, people, because sometimes I think I might be more grumpy and curmudgeonly these days, because I want to keep Seth in my life. And then I just want to end by what Seth almost always ended our conversations with as we stood in the street with our dogs. He would look at me and he would with just wide open face, he would say, how, after he had talked to me for a long time, by the way, he would look at me and he would say, how are you doing? And so that I hope all of us will look at each other and say, how are you doing? Thank you, Seth.
Hi, I'm Summer. I met Seth and Eunice first through business and then through dogs, and they just adopted me, so. And I'm so grateful. I texted Seth on July the 4th to see if they wanted to go see the fireworks. And I guess it didn't go through because in my inbox was an email asking if I'd tried to text and saying, it was nothing, there was no message attached, but he saw I tried to contact him. So last night I wrote him back. And I'm gonna try to read it. Yes, I did try to text you earlier on July the 4th to invite you and Eunice to watch the fireworks. And I never responded to your email because, well, I thought I'd see you again and just clarify in person. Except you're gone now, and no explanation will do. I miss you, Seth. Your damn voice is in my head, reacting to everything surrounding your death with sarcastic comments and non sequiturs, and I just had to look up how to spell that word. I miss your voice and you sliding down the hallway to greet me. I miss calling you and knowing that you will talk even when you're grumpy. I miss your openness and enthusiasm for whatever your latest thing was. I miss your brain and whatever data points were stored in its crevices and all the crazy funny crap that just shot from it to your mouth and sounded so smart and started the next conversation. I miss your inscrutable smile, your sardonic wit, and the various minuscule stages of your hair loss. I have been tripping over your stupid shoes on the porch all week, and I am just so damn hurt you're gone. Thank you and Eunice for adopting me. You were a compass bearing for me, and I will need to learn to navigate without you. I personally think you were at least 15 degrees off true north, but that is an argument for another time and place. I loved you, and I never told you, but I hope you knew anyway.
My name is Susan, and I grew up with Alicia. I moved in the 9th grade, and I never met her children. I came here today for her, and I leave today really envious of all of you that knew him, and thinking, do I get to leave and make such an impression on such a diverse group of people that we could all be that loving and kind and smart and witty? And all those other words that I've read about and you've heard and said, and I can't spell them and I can't say them. He must have been such a shining star. I'm sorry for you, for your loss. And I challenge you to go from here having enough of him in you that people can feel that way when it's your time to leave. And again, I envy you. You knew him, you loved him, you'll miss him. And I love you.
So I guess I've got, I'll try to rein myself in. I'm Michael Center. I was a physics graduate student when Seth came to the physics department, and we became close and have stayed close, and my wife Abby and Eunice have become close over the years. I got a couple stories from back when. The first really requires a little bit of a preface. Believe it or not, Seth has sort of mellowed over the years. Yeah. when I first met him, he was possibly the loudest human being that I have ever met. As you all know, very opinionated, very willing to argue, but not gently. And when he started hanging out with Eunice, in what became possibly the only successful relationship to ever emerge out of IRC, we hung out with them, and we were so happy for him and for her because it was clearly a fantastic fit. But after a few months, at one point, a few of us were hanging out, and there was sort of an awkward silence as one of us, I don't remember who, sort of awkwardly said, "So does anybody think it's funny that Seth is dating a deaf girl?" We always we thought that he's such a wonderful person, but that first impression was a little rough sometimes. So the other one, and this story is a little less unique than I thought it was an hour ago. Early on, Seth was attending a party at my house with a bunch of physics graduate students, and it's getting late into the evening, and some people had a drink or two more than they really needed. And one of the new students, who was a little bit crass, was telling us about this all-night diner that he just discovered, and made the rather unfortunate comment that, "Oh yeah, I was having a good time until about 2 a.m. when all these ethnic people came in." And there was an awkward silence, 15 or 20 people there, and nobody said a word except Seth, who yelled, and by the way, thank you, Jason, for breaking the ice on the language here. Seth bellowed from across the room, "What the fuck did you just say?" We get a lot of good people who know how things should be, but more than anybody I knew, Seth would really take a stand for it. I always loved him, especially for that moment.
Pardon me, I hadn't actually planned to say anything up here, but it's still kind of hard for me to imagine that Seth is gone. I probably met him shortly after Melissa hired him. This was 2000, 2001, and I was the nerdy sysadmin over in the EE department. And he swung by at one point and was like, "I want to make sure you know we're all getting together and hanging out." And I think the thing that I loved about Seth the most was that whatever he was interested in, whatever was the thing, he had a reason. It was the thing that was right. I once asked him, why was he a vegetarian? And it was a moral issue. I should have guessed at that point. I think when I first met him, he drove, what was it, Molly? It was a Jetta. I always think it was a Passat. It was a gas-guzzling Jetta. And then all of a sudden it was, wait a minute, we're screwing up the planet. And so it wasn't, I bought a hybrid. Seth got rid of his car. I loved that about him. When I moved back to Durham, he's been riding bikes at that point for 7, 8 years. And, what does he do? He says, "You need a bicycle." So he lends me a bike for 6, 8 months. I don't think I realized until he was gone how much I love him, how much I miss him. Sorry.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Victor. I hadn't necessarily planned to say anything either, but here goes. So, Seth and I heard of one another before we met one another. A mutual friend, Dan Swanwick, was getting some assistance from Seth on one thing or another. And the thing that he was getting some assistance with was something I'd done for Dan. And I believe the phrase that was used when Seth took one look at it, and I'm going to make it a little less pungent, was, "Who is this ignorant twit?" Anywho. Over the years, we met at gatherings with friends. And many of those friends, when they knew one or the other of us, wondered if we were going to be at each other's throats. And we had a number of disagreements over the years. And as has been said already, Seth mellowed, and so did I. We became neighbors, and we rode bikes. Actually, I recall now a time when, speaking of the white Jetta, I remember when Seth would pretty much hang out at the bar at Elmo's. Everybody knew that Seth just loved Elmo's. I recall trying to pull in for a meal at Elmo's, and actually, no, we were leaving. Carrie Ann and I, my wife, were leaving. And we just about got creamed by a white Jetta. And we had the person in behind, and, "Oh, there's Seth." Oh, and then we recognize each other. And, "Hey, how are you?" I can't imagine the empty spot he's going to leave for me. I'm still plumbing its depths. All I know is I'm going to miss him.
I'm a friend of Seth's. Well, let's call it sort of an acquaintance. I don't want to call it a friend because I come from the Windows world. Seth, one of the things that I like about what everyone has shared today is that it's from the heart. It expresses exactly what I remember about Seth. And it gives me hope that as a fellow curmudgeon, that there's hope for all of us curmudgeons to be well remembered and loved and liked. But Seth was a unique individual. He told you exactly what he thought and was really good at sharing those ideas. So I think we'll all miss him and the virtues that he brings. I just realized one of the biggest things that Seth caused today was this incredible gathering of people who are dressed up. It's like he would never have done that. So.
My name's Zoa, and all my interactions with Seth involve a bicycle. Always a bicycle. Except for today, I drove here from an hour away on the freeway for probably the third time I've ever driven on the freeway to be here today. I used to live here in this wonderful neighborhood. I no longer live here. And all my interactions with him usually had to do with something about whatever bike I was on that day. I have a collection of bikes. And one day I was coming home on my road bike from hiking, because if I want to go hiking, I got to ride my bike there, because I don't drive a car. I have a scooter, but it's only saved for when I'm really not feeling well. My tire blew, and because let's face it, the roads aren't the greatest for road bikes here. And I had made it almost all the way home, the 7 miles from the Eno to where we are, for about a mile or so up this way on the other side of Watts Hillendale. And all I needed to get to was Broad and Glove. And he came by on his bike, and he asked if he could help. Could he change my tire? Could he get me a lift home? Because he was on a bike, so he wasn't going to do anything about that. And really, just the fact that he stopped me, gave me a chance to, catch my breath, pull my asthma inhaler out of my backpack, catch my breath, and he walked with me all the way back home and made sure I made it back there. And it's not that my bike was heavy. It's a little 16-pound road bike. It wasn't that bad. And then another time, we were up at Whole Foods, and I was there in I have a 1954 vintage bike, which, people like to come up and look at it. And I have a bell on it that says, "This is my car." That's what the bell says on it. And he asked me, he goes, "Is this for real? Is this it? Do you not have a car?" And I was like, "No, I'm 40 and I still haven't learned to drive a car. I just don't really want to ever learn to drive a car." And he thought that was cool, whereas that's not the reaction I get from most people. But I told him that, this has been the hardest place for me to ever live. I've always lived in bigger cities. The public transportation, that really neat thing, subways, trains. And it'd been hard being here, and I had been commuting to Greensboro for work on the Amtrak every day and taking my bike on both sides. And I told him, I said, I'm eventually going to have to learn to drive, because at the time I was moving away from Durham. This is last year. He told me not to feel bad about learning to drive, that I'd already saved 25 years worth of gasoline. And in that really, I needed someone to make me not feel bad about finally learn to drive. And I do know how to drive now. I still prefer my bicycle. And I'm going to take my bicycle everywhere I can, and I always will. But I really appreciated all the times, these interactions we had, mostly pretty much on bicycles. And the fact that he was so committed to making the road safer for cyclists, for being a part of his community, not hopping in a car to go the 6 blocks to Whole Foods, or whereas most people do, and it always made. I did it because I didn't know how to drive, and I just always rode a bike. But he'd actually driven a car and decided to not drive a car and to ride a bike, and that was really special about him. And I don't think enough people think the way Seth does, and some of his ideas are pretty out there, but they're all pretty awesome as well. And I really, he's what made this neighborhood when I lived here. And it was one of the hardest parts about moving away, those crazy listserv conversations.
I posted this morning, but I thought I'd just share some memories. Seth Vidal had a sign on his physics office door that said, among other things, Cthulhu, which is from Lovecraft. Of course, you might remember this when Duke's web server got slashed at it because these kids did a video of them miming to R. Kelly's Ignition. And it was before YouTube, so many people were downloading it. Duke's web server got overloaded. He volunteered to host it on the physics web server, and he saved Duke once again. I suggested going to a new Mexican restaurant before heading to a Richard Thompson concert with Seth. Seth said he thought it might not be wise to experiment with food before a 2-hour seated event. And he was right. I saw The Fellowship of the Ring with Seth and Icon. I was eating some sort of candy which involved lots of unwrapping. Unfamiliar with the plot, I turned to Seth right before Gandalf falls off the bridge, plunging to a presumed death, and said, "Want some candy?" He and Icon screamed in hushed voices, "Shut up!" Seth thought it was funny that my street address was number 404. He claimed that my house auto-mounted when she put the key in the lock. Seth drove me home after I got my wisdom teeth removed. When Seth had a stomach virus, I brought him Gatorade and Walk Corey. Some of you Dukies remember, once at a CLAC meeting at Duke, I was touting the virtues of open source software, and somehow this involved lots of discussion of Seth's package and whether or not he would give it to me and if I wanted it. Seth was central to our Friday Geek beers at Satisfactions, though he himself only drank sweet tea. Sometimes Seth and I would walk over to Tunnel to use the magnet to erase hard drives. I've got 2 more. Seth helped me move and got Icon and Joe to help. And the only good things I can say about this are that at least we were done by noon, and that Seth showed yet again his wisdom in insisting Joe go to the hospital. Seth remained the #1 person on my security systems alarm call list for years, despite several attempts on my part to promote, for example, my husband Sean to that position. He always responded to every security call and never once noted that maybe Sean should A, stop setting off the alarm accidentally, and B, get on the list. And I only fixed this, I think, about 3 months ago. Seth introduced me to Fedora in around 2006, and many releases later, I'm still quite happy, and my husband has moved from Ubuntu to Fedora when he saw how fast it was for me to install and get online. I'm making a little plug. Thanks, Seth. Thanks, Fedora, and thanks, Red Hat. And finally, later, after Seth Yum did more than just make it easier to update and secure the physics computers, but went on to broader distribution, thereby saving the world, I would argue. Seth left Duke for Red Hat, met and fell in love with his wonderful soulmate and partner Eunice, and learned to repair bicycles, true a wheel, sew an apron, and I don't know what else, but we didn't see each other as much. But when he and Eunice would tandem by my house, I would hear him shout from wherever I was in the house, "Hello, Mai!" And I don't think he ever even knew that I could hear him. So, hello, Seth, and goodbye. Thank you.
These are just a couple of thoughts that I sent to Eunice the other day. I'm Dan Swanwick, the aforementioned. Seth's replies to the Linux group email list frequently bore a timestamp several minutes earlier than the original message. He was a petty time traveler, we think. When I first started considering law school, he dipped into his political science past and insisted that I take his copy of H.L.A. Hart's The Concept of Law, which still occupies a place of honor on my bookshelf, and which several years ago I really got into, and it helped me think about my current job, which has nothing to do with Seth's career, but he was knowledgeable and thoughtful enough that years earlier he'd sort of planted that seed. During the Second Gulf War, when I was an itinerant IT professional living in Charlottesville with my now wife, but still working for my in my position at Duke, I would frequently crash on his couch. No questions asked, just had to let him know I was coming. And by frequently, I mean like 4 nights a month, something like that. And he always had his alarm clock set to NPR very loud. So when Seth was up, I was up. And when the Second Gulf War started, it may be gone on 2 weeks or so, and every morning was just awful news. And he switched it off. He found something else to listen to because he just couldn't handle that drumbeat of bad news. It just didn't need to be waking him up. When I switched careers, went to law school, sort of bought into the whole, attorney-client privilege, secrecy, absolute opposite of everything that Seth believed in. I withdrew my online presence a little bit. I became, a lot less active, and eventually stopped talking to Seth quite as much. And I bitterly regret not being as in touch with him and as good of a friend to him as I could have been in the last couple of years. And then last fall, maybe, I joined Twitter, started being a little bit more active on Google+, posted a picture of my new house, and the first and only comment was, "Hey, Yaswano," from Seth. He was waiting for me. He adopted Corey to force himself to leave work at a reasonable hour, and she changed his life. And I think, not to be too creepy about it, but Eunice actually had a very similar effect. When I was deeply questioning my faith right before Catherine and I got married, and we're trying to figure out who was going to officiate the ceremony, he strongly encouraged me not to let the pendulum swing too far the other way, not to get angry, and to be a humanist, to love and include rather than exclude people based on beliefs. Finally, he argued forcefully before the 2000 election that voting was irrational because the chances of any one vote determining a national election were infinitesimal. Our friend Lewis had an absentee ballot in the 2000 election that didn't get returned, and I think Seth's views on voting changed after that election. He was a huge force in my life. It continued to be, despite not having seen him frequently recently. But I don't know how I go forward other than riding my beater bike around my new hometown. It being as open as I can be with myself, with my others, with my community, and letting the seeds that he planted flourish to make the world a better place.
Now that I can breathe, I can get up and say something. My family has known the Vidals for a very, very long time. Wade is my brother's best friend growing up. I was older than my brother, so Seth was younger than I was, and when we had family parties at my parents' house, he was this young little blonde boy that is on the board over there, and that's the way I remember Seth. I think that the young man that everybody remembers, all the goodness and the kindness, comes from a really, really fantastic family. As I sit here today, I realize how much Seth is really like his dad and his mom. I'm a single mom of 3 girls, and I live in the same neighborhood. I've moved back into the community where our family lives. And Seth's dad comes and checks on me all the time. And when I don't see him, I know that he's checking on me when he turns the corner by my house. So I don't think the apple fell very far from the tree. His mom walks the dog in the neighborhood, and I think she's checking on us as well. And my girls always run out and check and say hi to them. So I think Seth is very much a product of where he came from. I didn't know him as an adult. I didn't get to see him, but I felt like I knew him as an adult because every time his dad does stop by, he's bragging on all of his boys all the time. So I very much knew Seth as an adult, even though I didn't get to see him. But this little blonde boy that I used to see at the parties at my parents' house, we were talking about today, he would come to these parties, and this amazing intelligence that he had that is God-given or universe-driven was there even as a child. He was absolutely unique as a kid. Since I was a little bit older and he was younger than I was, he was a young man sitting at these parties, and somehow Seth and I would end up sitting and talking, and he would be talking to the adults at the party. And I'd sit there and he would be talking about these fantastic things, and I'm not sure that the adults knew what to make of Seth. So Seth and I would sit there and talk. And my mom reminded me that Seth would bring books to the parties, and they were always far and above his age range. They may have even been the law book that the other gentleman was speaking of. And at some point during all the parties, Seth would disappear and go read those books, and I think honestly, he disappeared to go read because he got bored of the adults. I think nobody could really keep up with him even at that point. So I think it's fantastic to hear all of these people remembering him and loving him as they did. And I think it's even more fantastic that he was able to use that intelligence and maintain his individuality and his kindness and his lovingness, and to find a partner that he could share that with. And I'm glad I could stop crying long enough to say all of that.
My name is Joe Sauer, and I was a student, and I also worked at Duke. Melissa also hired me. And I've known him through some very difficult times in my life. But he always had this amazing way of cheering you up, either by getting you pissed off first at him, or arguing about something completely unrelated to what you were thinking. The first time I met him, I showed up for a meeting on the wrong week. And he never let me forget that. And I learned so much from him. And he also saved my rear on many occasions. Like Molly said, he insisted that I go to the hospital after I got hit by a car. Just a little bit. He stayed with you? He stayed with me, picked me up, took me to my house. And, I lost my brother, and he took the time to talk to me and to make me go through that process. And I feel like I've lost another brother today. And I forgot exactly what I was going to say now. But just the power that he had, from his intellect to his kindness, to the incredible reasoning and ability to make you see things his way. But when he knew that he was wrong, he would change right away. His generosity. Please remember him for that. And keep that in your hearts. I almost didn't wear anything dressed up tonight because he spent probably about half an hour trying to convince me that my wedding should be done in shorts and t-shirts. And just the fact that I got him to wear a tux, I wish I'd brought a picture, was a great accomplishment for me. Love you, Seth. And he would call me on random frequencies, but even if he couldn't get a hold of me, every single time that he would call, he'd just leave me a quick message, trying to see how I was doing. And then he'd try via email and chatting. He didn't give up easily. And I just want to leave you with the last message he left for me. To hear his voice one last time. I've played this I don't know how many times. I hope this is okay. But
hey, Joe. Seth, I'm just giving you a call. Later, bye. Hey, Joe. Seth, I'm just giving you a call. Later, bye.
And I think that's what he'd like to say to all of you.
So I'm the guy who didn't cast the absentee ballot in Florida.
No idea. I just think back to, it was amazing. I mean, we met on bulletin boards. Like, we didn't meet in person for several years. We were just the total nerds, that everything you would expect, the trappings of that. I mean, we discovered Linux. I was in the room when Seth found Linux for the first time. Like, that's kind of amazing. And he was the kind of guy that he would call me every week. You know, he would find a way to stay in touch. He was like that guy that, you know, I might get too busy, and he would always call. Like, and man, there were times when Seth called, Seth talked, man. And there are definitely times when it's like, you know, you look at the phone, it's like, oh, God, I'll call him back. I feel a little bad about that now, I'm not going to lie. But it's interesting to hear, by the way, the thing about the one vote doesn't count, because if I knew that he said that, I had a professor in college that wrote a paper that showed that while you can't find, it was about whether you can determine when someone's bald, which is also ironic, by the way. And it does turn out that there is actually, you don't know which hair it is that makes them go from not bald to bald, but there is a hair. He proved that in his paper. And I would love to shove that in his face right now to know that I'd have an argument that I'd win. Because like everyone has pointed out, you don't win arguments with Seth very often. But yeah, man, I mean, you know, I was around when Seth ate meat. I was around when Seth wore leather belts. I mean, you know, it's funny because I remember every one of these discussions when it was like, I remember talking to him and him saying, like, I think I shouldn't eat meat anymore. And I'm like, dude, meat is amazing. And he did it. Like, you know, he was the guy that would decide that something is not right, and he would follow through. Like, it's so many, you know, there are any number of things that I have a belief that's like, yeah, I don't think that's really right, but like, I'm not gonna, you know, I leave my lights on at home. Like, I'm that guy. And hell, I work for Apple. Like, we like invented DRM. I mean, you know, but you know, he forgave me for that. I don't know. I mean, I'm just gonna miss the guy. I mean, just the experiences that we shared together. I mean, I was telling my wife, you know, there's all these little moments that, like, he and I had these little times that, like, he's gone. That's like, there's no one to reminisce with that about. You know, we would talk about, you know, man, do you remember at 2 o'clock in the morning in the VR lab and, you know, whatever. And he was just a great friend. I mean, he was just one of my best friends, and I'm going to miss him a lot. I'm so sorry, you guys. I still don't know how to get out of here.
I'm the Luddite. I'm the one with the books. My name's Galia, and Seth was my dearly beloved neighbor, as is Eunice. And Seth and I saw each other at least once a day dog walking. And probably 8 times out of 10 when I would see him, he would be on the phone, talking to Mike, talking to Joe, talking to Dad, talking to Grandpa, talking, you know. And he'd say, I'll catch you on the other side. Because I would walk this way, and he would walk this way. So by the time he got back, when he knew he'd say, I'm off the phone. Let me tell you about... And 10 minutes later, he would say, just as my partner Meredith said, so, how are you doing? And then he would listen. I'm an older woman. I'm the age that a lot of men find invisible. Not Seth. Not Seth. And I have to say that having had the privilege now of meeting his friends from all the different places that his life touched, and all the young men who have said to me with tears in their eyes, I am going to miss him so much. I have so much hope for the world because you all feel love for Seth and you can express it. My generation tried really hard to build that base for you. And the technology that you have and the ease of transportation, whether it's bikes, making cities bikeable, clean cars, it gives me a lot of hope. So thank you all for being there in that way for him and for Eunice and for our neighborhood. And I could go on, so catch me at the reception if you want to hear more. The last thing that Seth did for me personally was to come and look at the new construction behind my house, which is a studio that I've been wanting ever since I moved into the house 20 years ago. And he was jumping up and down, and he was so excited. He brought Eunice back over to see it, and damned if the first thing his father didn't say to me was, Seth was telling me about your studio. You have to show me your studio. And Wade sat down with us last night with paint chips and suggestions for how to go about making that place even better than it already is. It's just magical. I'm Jewish. And Seth always said, you sure about that stuff? And at one point he said, Galia, you know that's full of shit. He said, I'm sorry, did I offend you? No, Seth, you did not. So I've got two things I want to share with you. The one is really short, and it's in Hebrew, but I will translate. It's what is said to people when they first return to the community after the week of mourning that conservative and Orthodox Jews and some Reform Jews always practice after someone dies. And this is, I hope I can read this. Hang on a minute. Hamakom Yenachem Etchem Betoch Sha'ar Avalei Tzion B'Yerushalayim. May the indwelling place comfort you together with all of the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. And we understand Jerusalem to mean the whole world. And I found a poem that I've always loved that my Rabbi Steve Sager has shared with our community in many, many different ways at many different times. And when I read it, I took it to Eunice and said, would this be okay with you? And she said yes. So I'm glad to share it with you. It's written by a woman named Zelda. I don't know her last name. She's from a family of Holocaust survivors. I think she's gone now, but she wrote beautiful poetry in Hebrew. And this is a Marcia Falk contemporary translation and interpretation of it. Each of us has a name given by the source of life and given by our parents. Each of us has a name given by our stature and our smile, and given by what we wear. Each of us has a name given to us by the mountains and by our walls. I think of cubicles there. Each of us has a name given by the stars and given by our neighbors. Each of us has a name given by our sins and our longings. Each of us has a name given by our enemies and given by our love. Each of us has a name given by our celebrations and given by our work. And each of us has a name given by the seasons and given by our blindness. Each of us has a name given by the sea and given by our death. Seth was my friend, my dog walking partner, my inspiration. he gave me a bicycle because he said it was time for me to get rid of my car. Seth, this was one hell of a way to push me onto that bike. I will miss him more than you can know, or maybe some of you know. And I will always see him walking his dog in our neighborhood when I walk my dog, Izzy. And I will hold Eunice and his family in my own network of love and community forever. In Judaism, we say that as long as there is human memory, the person is not forgotten.
Galia's mention of Seth's enthusiasm reminded me of an anecdote I wanted to share. So those of you who live around here know that for the longest time, 40 separated the portions of the American Tobacco Trail, and Seth liked to go ride the south part. South part is kind of loosish gravel. And I had recently had a new bike built, a cyclocross bike, and Seth said, "Oh, let's go ride the south side of the trail. Eunice will go, I'll go. Carrie Ann comes along too." So that night I said, "That's great, let's do that." And I slapped some wide tires on my bike. And we're riding along, and we're going down the trail, and Carrie Ann and Eunice say, we need a little bit of a break. And I said, "Hey Seth, you want to ride this thing?" He says, "Yeah, that sounds like great fun." So he takes it up north on the trail a little bit, and then turns around and comes back. And this bike had some fairly decent brakes spec'd on it. And Seth, as he himself would say, is not a small boy. He lays the brakes on the rear and locks up the rear wheel and slides it. And he was laughing. He was smiling. He looked like a little kid, and he was just saying, "I haven't been able to lock up and skid the back tire on a bike since I was 8, like I was this tall." I can't get that image of him, just joy, absolute, unadulterated joy out of my mind.
Just a few housekeeping rules before we end with prayers. If any of you would like to give to favorite charities, if you would do so online to the Animal Protection Society of Durham, Rails to Trails Conservancy, Electronic Frontier Foundation. And you do that online at Fedora Wi-Fi, Wiki. See, I need Seth here to correct me. And please put on a name tag and come to the reception at the Hummingbird Cafe on Broad Street. If you'd like a ride, we're going to have shuttles available, or it's close enough to walk, but please come. From Corinthians 13, though I speak with the tongues of men and angels and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Charity suffers long and is kind. Charity envieth not. It is not puffed up. It does not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, and thinketh no evil. Rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, beareth all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Charity never faileth, but whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man or woman, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass, darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, charity, these three. But the greatest of these is charity. Let us pray. Grant to all who are bereaved in the spirit of faith and courage that they may have strength to meet the days to come with steadfastness and patience, not sorrowing as those without hope, but in thankful remembrance of great goodness and in joyful expectation of the days to come. So now go forth in peace to love and serve.